Well, hello again and welcome in. Wherever you are today and wherever you're listening from, I'm so happy to have you over to feast upon God's Word together. Get your plate ready today and take a seat. It's the 44, which is Matthew 4:4. Man cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Let's eat. I want to welcome you in today to episode 13 of season 5 of the 44. So glad to have you join in today on the podcast. And here as we start, a lot of what we're going to eat on today stems from a concluding small group class that we have going on up here at the building on Tuesday mornings, or every other Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, where we just finished a series on women of the Bible. And in our last class together, we honed in on not just a woman, but a man and a woman, a husband and a wife who are a really amazing example because of their devotion to the Lord. They are Priscilla and Aquila. And in thinking about them and studying them here recently and going through this class, one of the things that we talked about with them in our small group is just how much they moved around and lived in these different places. We learn through the scriptures that Aquila was a native of Pontus, but that they lived in Rome. They were kicked out of Rome by an edict of Claudius, and that they then spent some time in Corinth and then in Ephesus and then back again in Rome. So you're really talking about two people here when we look inside the Bible and we kind of piece together their story that really traveled around a lot. But I want to focus more in on just one lesson that we on Tuesday pulled from their life in Corinth, which I think is a really valuable one these days and one that I need reminding of as well. But before we circle back to them, let me just state something here that's super obvious, because if you spend any amount of time listening to conversations today, whether it be within the church or online or at work or sitting around the table with friends or turning on the TV, you've likely heard some version of what I'm about to parrot or echo back to you that sounds like this. Man, look at how bad things are getting. This world is just going downhill fast and it's spiraling out of control. It's harder than ever to follow Jesus because of what we are surrounded by and because of the time period that we live in. And honestly, you know, as you consider those things, there is some truth right there. But here is the super obvious upfront part. It's bad out there, yes. We live in a culture that increasingly pushes against God's design on so many levels, and I don't think I need to right here hash all those things out, but rather move from wherever your mind goes when I say that, with that super obvious observation, towards a question for us to grapple with today that is this: is our moment and our time in the world we live in today really all that unique and different? And borrowing a line from Solomon in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. What has been is what will be. And it might look a little different these days than way back when or when you were growing up. But when you really think about it again, is our moment, is our place in time really all that unique? Or is it that God's people have always been called to live faithfully in difficult places and in difficult moments that look just like ours? I mean, when you open and you read your New Testament, you don't find Christians thriving in these safe and comfortable and God-honoring environments. You find them in places like Corinth. Places like Corinth were known far beyond its boundaries as a place of corruption and a place of immorality. It was bad, it was wealthy, it was influential, it was obsessed with status and pleasure and self-expression. Sexual immorality was normalized, and idolatry was everywhere, and people did what they wanted and when they wanted and however they wanted. Like, it was that. And as we move on down the timeline to 2026 and where we are right here in this moment, does that sound familiar? Like you see, Corinth wasn't just a place where sin existed or immorality existed. It was a place where sin was celebrated and it was defended. Like, how's that for sounding familiar? But here's what's really cool, and what we're getting to is that right in the middle of that city is a couple named Aquila and Priscilla. When we're first introduced to them in Acts 18, we learn that they had ended up in Corinth after being forced out of Rome. They're opening their lives and their home to the Apostle Paul. We see them take him in and work together with him and end up ministering together. And here's what's perhaps the most powerful piece is that later on we learn something about this couple that gives us a little peek into who they really were. And not just in Corinth, but everywhere they went. When Paul writes this first letter to Corinth from Ephesus, he mentions Aquila and Priscilla, and he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 19 that the churches of Asia greet you, as do Aquila and Prisca, short for Priscilla, who greet you heartily in the Lord with the church that is in their house. And then again in Romans 16, in verses 3 through 5, in this long list of greetings that is Romans 16, Paul includes them. And we learn they are fellow workers and that they risk their lives for Paul's sake. And again, as they're now back in Rome, Paul says, greet the church that is in their house. Same thing here, a church that is meeting in their home. Now, here's what's important. I mean, we're not specifically told that happened while they were in Corinth, but I hope you don't miss here the pattern with them. And that is that everywhere they went, their home became a place for the good news. In Ephesus, the church meets in their house. In Rome, the church meets in their house, which means this isn't a one-off or one-time thing or once upon a time. Like, this is who they were. They didn't wait for the perfect environment. They didn't wait for the culture to clean itself up. They didn't say, oh, well, when things settle down, that is when we will live out the gospel. Instead, what we see is that right in the middle of whatever city they found themselves in, under whatever the circumstances were, even one we can say for sure that is Rome, that they were kicked out of before, there is a home where Jesus is honored, where believers gather, where truth is taught, and where lives are shaped by the gospel. And if that was true of them in places like Corinth, as it was true of them in places like Ephesus and Rome, then it raises the question for us here today, that is, what would it look like if our homes carried that same identity no matter where we live? And before we read this next verse, Romans 12 and verse 2, I want you just to consider for a moment what I'm about to say before I read this verse. Because when Paul writes the words that we're about to read, or that I'm going to read to you, he's not writing in a vacuum. He's writing as someone who had lived in places like Corinth. He's writing as someone who had seen believers navigate difficult cultures and difficult circumstances, which we know for sure that he too had experienced many of those. He's also writing as someone who had walked closely with people like Aquila and Priscilla. So while we can't say this for sure, what I'm about to say, I just wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had people like them, or some of the others listed and greeted in Romans 16 in mind, when he says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Again, maybe, just maybe, Paul had in mind people like them who had lived it out and didn't blend in or conform to the pattern of the world, and whose homes looked different even in hard places. You see, places like Corinth had a pattern of the world. It was loud, it was persuasive, it was sinful, it was not good. But Aquila and Priscilla made a decision to not allow that to shape their home. They didn't conform, not in their values or in their priorities or in what they allowed to define their lives. Instead, they are transformed. And you see that transformation not just in what patterns of the world they avoided, but in what they built. And man, this has just had me thinking a little deeper about their example and us here today, and then this verse here in Romans 12. And it just kind of got me to this place where I started to wonder if maybe sometimes we think faithfulness is just about saying no to the world. But I think one of the things Aquila and Priscilla show us and teach us is that it's not just saying no to the pattern of the world, but it's saying yes to something better as they build a home of hospitality. And we see them opening their doors not only to Paul, but to the other believers. We see them in their discipleship, in their mention inside of that story with Apollos that you might be aware of, and teaching him more accurately in the faith. You've also got this side-by-side ministry that they're engaged in, as they are never mentioned in the Bible separately, but always together. And then it's like this consistent pattern that is them, that no matter where they are, by way of exact location or city, and then also including that story of Apollos, we see they are consistently them, not just on Sundays when the church meets in their home, but even out publicly. Like their home isn't just a shelter for the world. They aren't just shelter from the world, but they are, and their home is a beacon of light in the world. And so while today's episode title, Even in Corinth, doesn't appear anywhere in Scripture, I love that phrase, because even in Corinth, they followed Jesus. Even in Corinth, they honored God. Even in Corinth, they raised the standard in their home. And here's where this lands today. Like, what if instead of those commonly spoken words about how bad the world is around us, we just started saying, you know what? Yeah, of course it's bad. That's obvious. But even here in 2026, in the United States of America, we will follow Jesus. Even in Ocala, even in Florida, even in America, even in 2026. Because if you really think about it, these two, Aquila and Priscilla, show us that they didn't try to change Corinth first. They didn't try to change wherever they were first. They focused first on their home. Because home is where values are formed and habits are built and faith is practiced, and Christ is either central or he's not. So while we may not have any control over everything going on around us, what we do have control over and what we do have a say in is the culture that exists within your walls. So your 44 today, it's this. What kind of home are we building? Are you building? Is it being shaped more by the patterns of this world or more by the presence of Christ? Aquila and Priscilla are a great reminder to us that you don't need perfect surroundings to build a faithful life. You just need a surrendered heart and a willingness to say, as for me and for my house, we will serve the Lord, even in Corinth. Thank you all so much for listening today. I love you. I pray you all have a great rest of your week. And until next Friday, keep on eating.